Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Clear Roads presentation of the final deliverables for the project on liquid-only roadway treatments, the training video for the implementation of liquid-only plow routes. My name is Pat Casey. I have the privilege of sitting in for Greg Wadley today, who's occupied with another project. So with that, I'm happy to turn the presentation over to Luke Porter, and thank you very much from Stonebrook Engineering, incidentally. Thank you very much for your great work on this project. Luke, it's all yours.
Thank you, Pat. So my name is Luke Porter, and I'm the video manager here at Stonebrook Engineering. We are a civil and transportation engineering firm based out of Minneapolis. So even though the title of this video mentions training video right there in the first two words, we really made a set of tools, 4 different tools for promoting liquid-only plow routes. So I'm going to go through each one of these tools that we developed in turn, and at the end of each section I'll check for questions and address any. So I'd like to kick things off with a few definitions just to make sure everyone's on the same page. We learned early on in the process of making these tools that this was kind of necessary for the topic. A liquid-only plow route means a route where we are only using liquid materials for anti-icing and de-icing. So no solid materials whatsoever, and that means no pre-wetted materials. And then I'm throwing the definition of anti-icing on here because we found a lot of agencies don't refer to it like that. They call it pre-treatment. But basically it's just getting that liquid down prior to a snow event to make sure that the ice doesn't build up on the road. And then if I do happen to mention granular at all during the presentation, I do mean rock salt. So I'm not talking about sand. So the goal of this project was to create a set of tools that would provide information about how liquid-only plow routes are beneficial. So these tools are going to help with gaining buy-in, informing the public and dispelling myths, showing people how to start a program, and then showing them how and when to use this type of plowing. As I mentioned earlier, there are 4 main tools. The first tool we developed was a literature search. It was a report about the current state of liquid-only plow routes across the country. And I'll be going into greater detail about each of these tools a little bit later here in the presentation. The second tool was a survey of practice, which was used to gather information about different agencies, liquid-only plow routes, experiences, and success stories, and any obstacles they might have encountered. Then we developed 2 quick reference guides that included the benefits of liquid-only treatments, some tips for gaining buy-in at your agency, and then some equipment recommendations and usage parameters. And finally, sort of the main tool and the main focus of this project was a set of 2 videos. One is a shorter video that just focuses on the benefits of liquid-only plowing and dispelling myths. And then the second video is a longer one that has that information, but it also has information on how to start your program, some equipment recommendations, and then some usage parameters. So these 4 tools, any agency could use them separately or together, depending on what you need. You could just use them internally, or you could include them as part of a public awareness campaign. So like I mentioned, that first task was the literature search. So we started out by performing a peer-reviewed journal search and seeing what we could find there. And then we expanded our search online to all sorts of locations. We looked at industry websites from people doing it on a nonprofit level and manufacturers. We looked at DOT and public works websites, even from city and counties around the country, newspapers, videos on YouTube and Vimeo and other sources. And then we had some great suggestions also by Clear Road staff that we incorporated into our search database. We needed to make sure each one of these sources was useful. So we looked past, just the main headline of each article, and we really looked at the full body of work. I've listed all the factors here that we use to decide if we should include the source in our report. Some sources that we found ended up just being a straight up copy of an original source posted somewhere else. So in those cases, we would always just use the original source, the original research. We compiled our results into a literature search report. So this was one of the deliverables for this project. In addition to just the normal citation information on each source, we also included a summary and why it's significant. You can find the full literature search report in the appendix of our final project report. So the results were that we found 17 different sources that we described in our report. And we used this information. First of all, we used it when we were writing the script for the video because we got a lot of good information from these sources. We used it in our survey of practice to help draft the survey questions. And then any of the authors and agencies that we identified in these sources, we made sure that they received a copy of the online survey when we sent those out. And then a nice side benefit from this was some of the videos, particularly the one from St. Louis Park, Minnesota, of their liquid-only program. We were able to reach out to them and use some of that good footage they had taken in our video. The survey of practice, the thought behind it was to kind of get us the current state of the practice on liquid-only plowing across the country. It built upon the information that we found when making the literature search reports. The task included identifying who was going to get the survey, creating and sending out the survey, and then conducting phone interviews with certain respondents. And I'll talk about why that's important here in a minute. But as far as identifying who was going to get the survey, we focused on the 20 US states that get the highest average annual snowfall, because we figured they would be the ones needing liquid-only plow routes the most. And then based on recommendations from Clear Roads and our project team, we added 7 more states for a total of 27 states. So we ended up with 679 survey recipients. And these are all applicable recipients that included DOT staff members, maintenance engineers, staff members at county and city public works, research specialists, some manufacturers, and some Clear Roads members. In some states, such as Alaska and Delaware, the DOT actually maintains 95% of the roads. So in those cases, only DOT contacts were basically included and no county or city folks. So when it came time for the online survey, we looked at a few things. We ended up deciding that recipients would be more likely to share their experiences through more of an informal phone conversation than a long online survey with numerous questions. Part of that's just convenience sake. It's a lot easier for someone to sit and talk on the phone about what they know than to start typing out an essay. And the distribution method we used, which was SurveyMonkey, their own history and experience shows that long online surveys actually have a higher rate of abandonment because users just don't want to type that much, and it also tends to cause them to speed through their answers, where SurveyMonkey would find that questions towards the end of the survey would be, the responses would be much, much shorter as people are just trying to get it done. So we didn't want that to happen. So we used the online survey more as a tool to narrow down people that would be interested in talking to us about their experiences over the phone. So the 2 factors we used were people that actually used liquid-only plow routes, and then anyone that would be interested in talking to us. As I mentioned, we used SurveyMonkey, and we provided the following clarification that you can see on this slide on what liquid-only plowing means. Kind of like how I started this presentation with just those couple of definitions. We want to make sure that everyone had a baseline understanding of the terms that we were using. Basically, that it's just a route where no solid material was used. And you'll kind of see us do this again in the video and in the quick reference guides. The survey included the following questions. Number 1, during certain weather conditions, does your agency have 1 or more planned liquid-only plow routes on which only anti-icing and or de-icing liquids are used? So you can see we worded that carefully to make sure people knew what we were talking about. And it would be a branching survey, so if they picked no, the next question would be basically why not? We got a variety of responses on that. And then the third question is just, can we call you and talk about this? The results were that we received 92 responses out of 679. That's 14% response rate. That's higher than the industry average, and it's higher than SurveyMonkey's own average rate of 10%. Out of the 92 respondents, 30 had a liquid-only plow route, and out of those 30, 22 indicated that we could talk to them over the phone. The full responses, all the raw survey data, is included in the appendix in our final report. So here's a visual representation showing how 32% of the respondents had a liquid-only plow route and 68% did not. Our next step was to perform the phone interviews. The 22 users with liquid-only plow routes who were interested in providing us with more information, we developed a list of interview questions for them. We wanted to get information about their overall program, the kind of roads they treat, the application rates and materials that they use, how they make and store their brine, and even what kind of brine they use, salt brine or magnesium chloride or calcium chloride, what their cycle times and loading times are, and then what the public and environmental perception is like in their area. Out of those 22 potential candidates, we were able to interview 14. So the 8 who could not be interviewed, they either didn't respond to our voicemails and emails, or they were out traveling during summer, or they just misunderstood the survey. For example, some agencies, they only had the automated bridge liquid de-icing systems, which are outside the scope of this project. So I'm going to summarize the results of the survey here, each section. The earliest usage was in the late 90s, and the most recent was 3 years ago. I'd say the majority started about 10 years ago on average. In every case, it basically started through research, and oftentimes it was the research coming right out of Clear Roads that these agencies I talked to would specifically identify. Some others mentioned the research performed by the Colorado DOT and the Utah DOT. And I would hear stories kind of the, I guess you could call it the changing of the guard, where there would be an existing area supervisor who simply didn't believe in liquid-only plow routes for whatever reason. And then that person would retire or take a different job, and oftentimes the new person might be more inclined to try out something new. And that's when I would see a lot of these agencies starting up their programs. As far as the types of roads that were included, it was generally either by priority or proximity. Some agencies would just start with the roads right next to their shop because it was easy to get to them. Other agencies would start with their highest priority roads, since those were the most important, and then branch out from there. I remember one agency, they didn't have enough equipment to do a big multi-lane highway with liquid only, but they wanted to because they liked it so much. So what they would do is they would do liquid only on just one lane in each direction, and then they would do solids on the other lanes until they could build up their program more. Timing based on the storm event. So out of all the agencies I talked to, it was generally accepted that as far as salt brine goes, that you shouldn't apply more than 24 hours in advance, that it could get pushed off the road over time by traffic or washed away by rain. Now, it's obviously a different story with magnesium chloride, where you could pre-treat the road 48 hours in advance and be fine. So most agencies with their salt brine treatment did it 8 to 12 hours before a storm event. And then there were a few that would actually wait until, 3 hours before, 2 hours before, or even right when the storm started, just in case the forecast would change. They didn't want to waste any material. A lot of these agencies, they had spreadsheets or other guidance to tell them when to start, but they would generally just rely on the experience of their shop supervisors. Application rates would range from 15 gallons per lane mile on the low end up to 100 gallons on the high end. And I went through and tallied up all the people I talked to, and the average was about 50 gallons per lane mile. I saw a lot of agencies say 50 or 60 during our phone interviews. And generally speaking, the agencies wouldn't change their application rates depending on what type of storm or how intense the storm was. There were a few that did, but generally they just kept the same application rate all the time. Most agencies made their own brine. A few would purchase it. Generally, they had a brine maker that they purchased themselves. Occasionally, they would make their own brine makers. Most agencies were producing about 5,000 to 6,000 gallons an hour, and they used 2-inch lines coming into the brine maker. A few agencies had some higher-end brine makers that if they used solar salts and if they had the really expensive brine maker, they could do about 9,000 gallons an hour. The storage capacity would vary all across the board. I took the average of it all, and it was 6,000 gallons. I had some smaller agencies with 3,000 gallon tanks and some larger ones with brine farms that would have 40,000 gallons on hand. Most agencies were using the polyethylene tanks. and then a couple using fiberglass tanks. I didn't really see any instances of people using steel tanks anymore. The additives were occasionally used with salt brines, generally for inhibiting corrosion. We'll get more into that into the environmental section though. So a lot of users that I talked to were at a higher level in the agency where they didn't know the specific route times or the average route times. From what I was able to gather, it was about an hour and 45 minutes. Some route times were as short as 45 minutes and some as long as 3 hours. I think on the high end, you'd have to have one of the bigger tanker trucks in order to get enough liquid down over that time. Most of the agencies I talked to said that their route times were just a little bit faster with the liquid-only treatments, generally because the loading times were quicker, but also some said that their trucks were able to drive just slightly faster applying the liquids and the solids because they didn't have to worry about the bounce rate. They had an average loading time of about 15 minutes. I will add here that a few agencies would use 2 pumps per truck to get them to load faster. They were generally using electric pumps with 2-inch lines for the transfers. Effectiveness, I think across the board, pretty much every agency felt that liquids were more effective than solids. And I would hear a lot of these reasons over and over again. Less waste, solids would bounce off into the ditch or get pushed off the road by traffic. They're predictable, they'd work the same way every time. Easier to control the application of liquids, they'd stick to the road better. This became important in areas where it was a windy road without a lot of trees or other hills or areas blocking the road, that the liquids would stick to that road better during the wind. Decreased overall salt usage, and then just the speed that the liquids would work at. 2 specific examples here. The Delaware DOT found that liquids don't work as well during the really heavy snowfall. So during those times, they would go into, I think they call it plow only mode. And then once the heaviest part of the snowfall would stop, they'd come back through with more liquid. The Oregon DOT would have instances where the liquid treatments would dry out during really intense storms. So they would come through with multiple trucks and do those repeat applications more often so they wouldn't have time to dry out. Public perception was generally positive with every single person I talked to. And if there were concerns, it wasn't really on a group level. It would just be a few individuals, and that they would address those individuals more on a one-to-one basis. Now, the next point I think is actually really important. The agencies stress the importance of educating local officials. So these agencies had a lot of success with keeping the public-facing officials of the organization informed, because they're often the ones that take care of that first line of defense once the public has concerns. So depending on your agency, this could be a public affairs officer or a county board member, a mayor, any number of people. That it helps for these people not just to be able to inform the public why you use liquid-only plow routes, but also for them to be advocates of it. Many states have training that educates shop personnel and area managers. I know Oregon's is called Snow School, and they actually have some classes that they invite policymakers to attend so they can learn about it. The Montana DOT had the Salt Institute come and hold a workshop, and they also invited policymakers and the general public to parts of it. I remember one user said that the only time they received any sort of complaints from the public is when the liquid-only truck broke down and they had to go back to using solids for one storm. Then they got the complaints. So following up on that, the other type of concerns that agencies will hear is environmental. And what I heard over and over again, worded slightly differently, is that the goal is just to provide the best level of service with the least amount of environmental impacts. Now, a lot of agencies are not able to use additives due to sensitive areas or sensitive waterways in their state. They would typically address these types of environmental concerns with people just on a one-to-one level. I know a lot of users told me it was helpful to share research from different agencies or to share the specs from the manufacturer. Research. Most agencies didn't have a formal research project. I know a lot of them would just do trial and error and see what worked for their shop. Many of them would call out Clear Roads by name and said they relied on Clear Roads to provide research. And I also once again heard mention of the Colorado DOT and the Utah DOT's research. They have formal processes, they publish online, and they also provide funding to local universities and institutes. And then just some general comments that I saw. Some agencies experimented with calcium chloride, but they stopped due to corrosion issues. A user from the Utah DOT commented that magnesium chloride can clog pumps if you don't dilute it. That's a lot harder to store. Some users didn't like the term liquid-only routes because, in their state, no route could truly be liquid-only once that temperature gets too low. So they're hoping someone could come up with a better name than that. I know one other thing that comes to mind is many agencies said that they're using a lot less salt than they were with solids. I heard numbers of 50 to 80% less salt than they were before. And that helped them gain buy-in at their organizations, helped them to expand their program once those cost savings came in. So we used the results of the phone interview. We used it for the quick reference guides, which I'll talk about next. We used it to identify interview candidates for the videos. We actually flew out and interviewed people. We used it for guidance when writing the video scripts. And then that thing we heard many times, it was nice to verify that the research that's being conducted by Clear Roads is being used. It's being used nationwide and people know it by name. So I didn't see any questions on the survey of practice. I'm going to move on to the quick reference guides. So Clear Roads had created a reference guide in 2010 called During Storm Liquid Applications, a new tool for the winter maintenance toolbox. This was a 6-page document that had some tips and tricks, application rates, equipment recommendations, and an expert contact list. As part of this project, we updated this and created 2 reference guides. We felt it would be beneficial to have 2 separate guides. One that was more of a startup guide for decision makers and the general public, and the other that was more of a technical guide for new users and practitioners. So this is what the startup guide looks like. The actual document is included in our final report, so you'll be able to see it better there and print it and hopefully use it. But it included the discussion of the benefits, some definitions, some tips for gaining buy-in at your agency, and then equipment recommendations for agencies looking to start a program. This is the technical reference guide. It also had definitions just to keep everyone on the same page. It included usage parameters, including for anti-icing and then de-icing during a storm. It included application rates and cycle times and some general tips. So these quick reference guides were formatted as a 1-page front and back PDF. So you can print them front and back and you can laminate them. You can hang them on the wall in the shop or you can throw them in the truck. They were designed to be easily read on an iPad or a tablet. And then they were formatted for compliance with ADA and W3C guidelines. That's it for the quick reference guides portion. Next was the videos themselves. So as I mentioned at the beginning of this presentation, we created 2 videos. And it was kind of the same thought as the quick reference guides, where a shorter video would be more appropriate for policymakers and the general public, and the longer video for practitioners. The tasks included picking out who we were going to interview, performing the interviews, filming some action footage, and then producing the videos. So we wanted to get a wide variety of viewpoints when we were interviewing people. So we identified 5 different categories for interview candidates: a statewide level position, a shop level position, a chemical expert, an equipment expert, and a non-technical advocate. So we discussed this as a project team and with some Clear Roads representatives. We identified Kyle Lester from the Colorado DOT, Ann Brown from the Delaware DOT, Roger France from the Utah DOT, Ron Wright, who is now retired, from Idaho DOT, Benji Schoenrock from Veritech Industries, and Kurt Briggs from the city of Prior Lake, Minnesota. So these are the people that we interviewed. We drafted interview questions that would be specific to each type of position. You can see the full list of questions in our final report. But basically, we wanted to ask them questions about what they knew and get their perspective. We conducted the interviews right at their own location, usually at their maintenance garage or yard. Oftentimes, they'd give us a nice tour of their facility so we could see how they make their brine and store it. And we performed the interviews from June to September of last year. So action footage is also called B-roll footage. We use that during parts of the video when there is a voiceover, or during interviews when someone is talking about a specific thing that we want to highlight. We filmed action footage at 2 shops here in Minnesota for the DOT, also the City of Prior Lake shop. We filmed at the Utah DOT. We filmed at Monroe Trucking in Wisconsin, and then Veritech Industries in Alexandria, Minnesota. We also went to Idaho DOT's Central Labs. That's where we interviewed Ron Wright. We were able to get some footage of his testing equipment. And then some agencies sent us additional footage to use in our video. The Delaware DOT, Ohio DOT, and the City of St. Louis Park. That image you see there is from the Ohio DOT. They had some amazing footage that they took with a drone flying over their vehicles, and you'll see that 2 different times in the final video. So as I mentioned, it's 2 different videos because it's 2 different audiences. The shorter video focused just on the benefits of liquid-only treatments and dispelling myths. And the shorter video, I would see that being more appropriate for social media sharing, more of the public-facing aspects. The full-length video has the same information as the short video, but it also adds on to that with tips on starting a program, equipment types, and those usage parameters and application rates. So the longer video is more useful for internal use or cross-agency communication. You could use it in your staff training, and what we included with the videos were just some suggested titles, descriptions, search tags, and the closed captioning files so that these would be appropriate for all audiences, and that we're hoping it can increase the organic reach of these videos on YouTube. So we're hoping that agencies will share these videos, and we can even provide the full video files. If you'd rather have those, we could put them on a DVD, or we could upload them to a file sharing site. Here are the links to the 2 videos. So you won't be able to click them here in this presentation, but I will have Pat and Greg send out the links in an email, so you'll be able to just click them easily. So at this time, if you had any questions, you could start typing them. I'd like to say that the main goal here was to provide these modern communication tools where it would be easy to help people at agencies garner support or gain buy-in, help with training, help with promotion, that really you could use any number of these tools separately or together. So the tools are available right now, and they can help you guys put the right message in front of the right audience. I hope you'll find the tools useful. We've been really happy with the results. We had a lot of fun making the video and meeting new people. I know here at Stoneberg, we've taught a lot of people about liquid-only plowing who had no idea what it was before. So I want to thank you guys for the opportunity to work on this project, and I want to thank you for attending this webinar. I wish you guys the very best of luck with your liquid-only outreach and training. And with that, I will turn it back over to Pat.
Okay, thank you very much, Luke. We have some time left. We can certainly entertain some questions if anybody has any. Well, Scott Lucas just put a question in the chat box. You could start with, Luke. What is your suggestions for further research?
That is a good question. I think that through the literature search, if you look through where the sources that we found there, you can certainly see where we were searching, and you can use that for similar searches at different agencies. But I think one resource that a lot of people underestimate is YouTube, that nowadays just about anything you want to find out is on YouTube. If you want to fix your dryer or how to unlock your car, I did find even since starting this project, since doing the literature search, more YouTube videos have surfaced from other agencies. So I would say to start there, because it's always nice to have video to go along with the audio so you can really see exactly what the person is talking about.
Great. Any other questions? Now, Luke, it looks like you covered it so thoroughly that everybody's happy with the report and clear on what was presented. So thank you very much. And as Luke said at the beginning, the recording of the presentation will be available on the Clear Roads website before too long. So with that, thank you all for participating, and we'll, I'm sure, catch up with you when the next research is presented. Have a great day.
Thank you.